Today, I'm speaking with Representative Catherine Clark about a very, very important issue for millions of Americans, especially in the COVID epidemic, and that is the issue of childcare, which at the best of times has been very precarious and expensive and difficult for many moms and dads across this nation, but is extremely more difficult now. Many people have been out of work, millions of Americans, and even thinking about getting back to work in a climate we don't know is safe or not for our children presents us with a childcare issue. And, at a time when we so sorely need to go back to work, how are we going to take care of these kids? And I want to talk about that, but I want to first talk about, what do you think we are doing? What is Washington doing to get us back on track regarding the coronavirus?
This week in Congress, we are celebrating and honoring John Lewis, who was a beloved colleague. And I have taken great solace in his words at this time that we have to be bold. That we have to keep marching and meet this moment with love for our communities. He often talked about the beloved community, and childcare is at the intersection of that, because there is no such thing as someone else's children. They're all of our children, and protecting our future means protecting our children and enabling parents to be part of the workforce and children to receive the care that they deserve and need to flourish.
I myself have known in my mind that the key to every part of my life puzzle functioning is to have good childcare. Like, nothing happens if, that piece isn't taken care of and handled, and it's a done deal, And I can't imagine what it's like for people who don't have, resources. And in some cases, in some states, childcare can cost more than university tuition.
That's right.
Yeah, so what is that?
It's a staggering cost, and it's one of these issues that existed pre-pandemic, and as you said, has just been exacerbated and made worse. It is also one of these essential services that we tend to sort of brush aside and think about as an afterthought, instead of making sure that we look at it as essential infrastructure to our economy, on par with roads and bridges and broadband availability. It absolutely is. And we have to stop thinking about this as private decisions made primarily by moms, but certainly by parents, and that it just is a private family matter. This is an essential public service. It is part of our education system. It is part of our workforce development system, and it is absolutely critical to making sure that we can reopen.
I mean, I can think of no job that is more important to the future of our nation and our society. This spring, I and my daughter's father took turns helping her with online learning, all while each of us having a full-time schedule of our own work, and we only have one child. I can't imagine what that experience is like for people who have multiple children. I mean, I always had a respect for teachers. I always felt they were vastly underpaid. But after effectively becoming, a elementary school teacher this spring for my daughter, first of all, I think I failed fourth grade geometry, which was harrowing. I had to Google a whole bunch of stuff. But, it was hard. It was hard on me. It was hard on my daughter. It was hard on our relationship. And this really it's frontline work, but it's also really skilled work. And I know it's very expensive, as a society to have proper childcare. I also know that these caregivers are basically sometimes not even paid a living wage, sometimes under $11. And I think, you have to invest in in fortifying that workforce, making sure they're taken care of, make sure they have incentives for higher education. And I know you've got a lot of bills, different legislation that you're proposing. Can you tell me about that legislation?
Yeah, I mean, our legislation's calling for a major investment of $50 billion to stabilize the childcare industry. And then we are looking for more money, $10 billion in grants to help childcare providers make changes to their homes so they can safely reopen, whether that's adding a vestibule, as one provider asked me that that's what she would use grant funding for, so she could check temperatures before having children come into her home, or putting up a modular wall, buying equipment to help sanitize toys. But we have to look at the fundamentals as well and make sure that these early educators are compensated fairly for their work. And I don't think it's a coincidence that these providers are not really thought of as educators. They are not, that is not reflected in the pay that they get. And they are overwhelmingly women and women of color.
Of course. So thereby it becomes easier not to pay them a living wage.
Exactly. And so I think it is just one example of the type of gender disparities that we see in so many industries. But because childcare providers are 96% of them are women, it really hits home in the childcare sector.
How do you propose to reduce the cost of childcare while still paying for a living wage for those workers? Because on the one hand, it's so expensive, but on the other hand, the very people we rely on, we are not compensating. So where's that money going, and how do we reduce the budget?
Yeah, well, exactly as you said. I mean, we've had over 325,000 providers lose their jobs since February of 2020. That is staggering. And yet we have these very high costs for families. So we're looking at tax credits, flexible spending plans that can help reduce costs for families, and ways to help educators, our childcare providers, have more income, allow them to have higher rates of reimbursement under our block grant. These are the type of things that the federal government is uniquely positioned to do to help close that gap between.
And are supposed to do, correct?
And supposed to do. For very high costs for families and low wages for providers. So that's our job. And we are here to look out for American families and to help. Going back to what we were saying, this is essential infrastructure, and we have to make the investments that reflect it.
This is a great moment in our culture. It's a very painful time, but it's also, in my mind, a time for a lot of potential growth. It can be a learning moment. It can be a chance to rebuild things. And, how can we build a system that works for all families? What can we learn from other countries? What can we do differently, since we are at this crossroads, to build a better childcare system?
Yeah, we have this opportunity, and childcare is at the intersection of so many of the struggles and challenges that we're talking about and trying to face together. It is at the center of disparate educational outcomes and opportunities for children. It plays into healthcare disparities that we have seen just play out in such a heartbreaking fashion. It is at the center of racial justice, because so many of these providers are women of color. Mm-hmm. And also we know that families and parents of color have an even harder time affording high quality childcare and finding and accessing it than do white families. So, all of this work that we are doing as House Democrats to make sure that we are making the investments, that we understand the connection between a healthy economy and a healthy childcare industry, and that we understand that the data is there that shows that every dollar that we invest in early learning and care comes back to us eightfold, that this is a good investment in our future and in our children.